right. Well, good afternoon. Nice to see you all again. So when we talk about, I'm a little bit speechless from this presentation. Thank you so much for that. It's really moving. In the United States, Muslims are less than 2% of the population. There's just no way we can make any progress without allies, without people who are going to speak with us and on behalf of us and to our neighbors. Connecting with people, I really believe, is the most effective way of overcoming the fear that people have of Muslims, but the numbers are very difficult, right? It's just really very difficult, which is one of the reasons why we need allies, we need friends, we need our neighbors to say, hey, I know a Muslim, and they're nothing like what you say. We live in a time, certainly, where there are no naive encounters between Americans and Muslims. I don't know if there ever were. I mean, as adults, we know that we spend our whole lives constructing and then deconstructing what we know. It seems like we grow up and we learn, and we learn so many things, and then we question them and start unlearning them, and it's just this constant process of trying to make some order of the world, and then realizing that our perspective's limited or wrong or skewed. And that's why I do agree with the Dalai Lama that it's so important that we understand our minds and we understand the way that our attention works, why we pay attention to some things and not others, how we make risk assessments, how it's very easy for us to be manipulated. And the reality is that we will always remember traumatic, upsetting, disturbing images. That's a survival mechanism for humanity. We could see 100 pictures of Muslim teenagers planting trees or Muslim families sitting and having dinner. We could even see the women being elected head of state. But we're not going to remember those images. We're going to remember the images we see of violence and trauma. I ask many audiences not only about heads of state, how many Muslim women have been heads of state, but how many Muslims have won the Nobel Peace Prize? It's a lot in the last dozen years. And just there have been 3 women in the last dozen years, and many people remember Malala Yousafzai, and they remember her because she was the victim of violence. She's a person who was a victim of violence, but also, tremendously articulate, charming, advocate for education. But what about the other 2 women who weren't victims of violence? Tawakkul Karman, who led a non-violent, peaceful political revolution in Yemen, which is one of the most conservative, tribal Arab Muslim societies. And the pictures of her leading men and women, and her husband at home with the kids and bringing the kids down to her tent in the middle of the square where she was leading this peaceful revolution. I've yet to be in a general audience and had anyone say they remember her or know her. So we have this problem. We have a knowledge-based problem. We have a perception-based problem. That's not counting down, do I? Okay, all right. I started public speaking probably in the late 90s, regularly giving talks to civic organizations, churches, synagogues, and I really did notice the shift in about the mid-2000s, and it was during when the Iraq War really got going, when the occupation of Iraq and all the violence got going there, that audiences I encountered no longer had any sense of openness. Before, I would be invited and say, well, we don't really know that much about Islam. We don't really know anything about Islam and Muslims, so we'd like you to give a presentation. After about 2004, 2005, everyone in the audience was convinced that they knew what Islam was and what Muslims believe. And it was, I realized that I couldn't just give information because it was being filtered away from a very strong conviction that they knew what Islam and Muslims were, and it's even more so now. Now the case is, why is that? Again, is it something that's just been happened sort of passively? For many people, for many ordinary Americans, it's the water we're swimming in, right? And it's making people afraid and terrified. So terrified that when I was in the Flint airport a few weeks ago, and when you go to the airport, you have a certain amount of tension, like, oh, I'm going to get there on time, and the TSA line, and and then you finally get to the gate and you relax, you're sitting there, okay. And as I just got in the gate area, and I relaxed, and I'm pulled out my phone, and I'm scrolling through my emails, and suddenly someone just came right in my face. This woman came in my face and said, "You're being brainwashed. You're being brainwashed. You don't have to wear that. You don't have to wear that." And I was just so shocked. And she was so frantic. She was so upset. She was so nervous. And I just, after I was shocked because it was really out of nowhere. And then I'm trying to say, okay, she's so upset. How do I relax her? And I said, no, what do I say? It's okay. So I'm trying to calm her down, and I stood up so I could talk to her, and she started running away, and I'm like, wait, don't run. Check my website out. ingridmattson.org, M-A-T-T-S. I didn't, how am I going to, I felt so bad for her that she's walking around in this state of just fear. So it needs a lot of compassion, but it is a very difficult problem. And the question is, I think the answer is that why it's happening and why it will continue happening is in those numbers.
You only care about ours.
It is. It's the number, but it's also the money. And they always say, follow the money. Why? I just want to, really, we just have to think. Sometimes it's just common sense. It's just basic common sense. Why did Glenn Beck write a book on Islam? What does Glenn Beck know about Islam? What did he get, And why are people buying his book on Islam? Why would they consider him an authority on Islam? So here we've clearly got some people who are taking advantage of the situation for monetary gain. They're making a lot of money. There are people, we saw the money that's being spent on the war on terror. Some of those people, that probably doesn't even include the self-style experts and the people, if you go on Amazon and they claim to be experts on Islam and they're selling books about how horrible Islam is. So there's a lot more money being made there. Think tanks popping up all over the place, strategic this and analytic critical this and security this, and putting forth, packaging people to come and further this message that Muslims are scary, Muslims are terrifying, and they're not telling you the truth. And this is really the most insidious part of it. Because I've been told by audiences that I don't understand Islam. Just think about that for a minute. Or that I'm not telling the truth, right? And there is and I'm going to focus on this because it's really important and it's going around more and more. And it's something I heard, unfortunately, from someone with a religious education in a government-appointed position who, even I always feel like I'm beyond being shocked, but then something else happens and I'm just shocked again, who said to me, okay, you've explained these things. You've written a book on the Qur'an where you've put the verses about war and peace in context, and you've explained to us certain things about, for example, the moral trajectory of the Qur'an, how most Muslims don't want to relive the 7th century, but we want to take the values, the principles. Of course, our ritual life is based on the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him. But I mean, for the vast majority of us, except for those utopian fundamentalists, we're not interested in, reproducing like some kind of weird, play, the 7th century, right? We want to work towards the increasing liberation of humanity, etc. And he said to me, well, I have to ask you a question. How can we trust anything you say when we know that Muslims have a religious, what did he call it? Like a religious precept that you're supposed to lie about your faith. And he said it's called taqiyya. So they know nothing except for this thing. So this taqiyya means dissimulation or concealing. And so what he said, and this is an educated person in government position, saying that Muslims are concealing the truth about their religion behind this, which is then, if you look at imagery about Islam and Muslims, it's all about being hidden, right? So I mean, honestly, I'm so tired of voyeuristic metaphors: behind the veil, beneath the veil, unveiling, lifting the veil, peeking behind the veil. What's behind? It's really just so overdone. But you'll see the images. It'll always be someone with a masked face, right? So we don't really know who these are, and this is a very significant, very old accusation about Muslims. So in the time I have, let me just tell you what this means. Muslims, if they are being tortured, if they are being at risk of having their life taken away, it is allowed for them to say, no, I'm not a Muslim. How do we know this? Where did this happen? I mentioned this morning about Ammar, Sumayya, and Yasir. Ammar and Sumayya, slaves in Mecca who were tortured unto death, Sumayya being sexually violated in the torture before being killed for being a believer in Mecca. Their son, Ammar, was tortured with them and watched this happen to his father and to his mother. And the torturers said to him, renounce your faith, renounce God, and we'll let you free. And the trauma and the terror of what was happening to him made him, at that point, renounce God. And he went to the Prophet Muhammad crying, weeping. He said, I've been ruined, absolutely ruined. And he explained what happened. And the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said, if they come to you again, say the same thing. Because God knows what's in your heart. And he was not in a state where he should lose his life in this horrible way for this. So, I think the beginning of perhaps a truly fascist state, in the sense of, well, a totalitarian state in the modern world, I think the seeds of it really came in under the Inquisition in Spain. When it wasn't enough for the Jews and the Muslims to, under threat of force and persecution and torture or being banned, when they gave up their faith and they said, we're Christians, because the Inquisition said, no, they aren't really. and honed all of the instruments of torture and terror to try to find out what they really were. And is this how we'll find out who's a Muslim when we decide to ban Muslims from the United States? I don't know. But in that context, there were those, both Jews and Muslims, who concealed their faith, hoping that eventually they would be freed from this tyranny, freed from this oppression, and one day being free to have their faith. And the idea of the perfidious Jew, the Jew who is lying and sneaky, and the Muslim who conceals his or her faith and doesn't show you your true face, became a dominant trope in Western literature that then continued to characterize who are these Semites until today. So that's the reality of the situation. And so this idea of don't trust the Muslim has very deep, insidious, and very disturbing roots in our culture, and we have to be extremely careful about it.